Welcome back to the Return to Base podcast. On this episode, you're in for a real treat. We have Alex Bertelli. He's a former 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment pilot. In addition to that, he's also the CEO and founder of HavenLock, the lock that is 10 times stronger than a deadbolt and installs in less than 15 minutes. You may have heard of Alex or seen his handiwork when he appeared on Shark Tank, where he pitched the sharks on HavenLock, and things didn't go quite as planned. Didn't walk away from the Shark Tank with a deal, but he gave us pretty much the most viral clip ever in the history of Shark Tank, which we'll talk about a little bit on this show. So, but without further ado, let's do this. Bravo Zulu, this is Victor Lima. We are RTB. This is Return to Base, a VeteranLife podcast. Alex, what's going on, man?
Hey, Cliff. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. For those of you who missed the introduction or kind of cruised through it, Alex is the CEO and founder of HavenLock. And he's an MBA, has an MBA from the University of North Carolina, and was a former 160th Chinook pilot, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I flew the MH-47G out of Fort Campbell. I was in the unit for about 8.5 years.
Awesome. So Alex and I met each other a few years back at a veteran networking event, I believe, and we kind of stayed in touch. And as I was getting out of the military, Alex was kind enough to offer me a place on his team at HavenLock as part of my DoD Skill Bridge internship. So I appreciate that. That kind of catapulted me into understanding what the civilian world, corporate world is all about. And it really actually got me some exposure to a startup. And we'll get into all that. But, I always like to start off with, this is a veteran focused podcast. So it's great to hear why exactly you decided to join the military when you did and how that went. So, yeah, without further ado, what led you to join the United States Army?
Yeah, it was kind of I guess, serendipity that led me there. My family was living in Rochester, New York at the time. My dad had just retired early from a VP job at a company called Crosman. They make air rifles and BB guns. And my mom was actually the breadwinner of the family. She kind of flipped all of dad's earnings in the stock market and traded options. And, a couple years prior to 2001, dad had left to go focus on being a dad instead of being a road warrior. And as you all, I'm sure, can remember, the stock market crash in 2001, and that had a pretty big effect on our family. My college fund was gone. My mom had to go to work in a department store. My dad had to get back into corporate America. And so I was faced with a difficult choice. Do I go to community college, or do I just kind of hang it out there and see if I can find a way to fund my education? And so I started applying for scholarships, University of New Hampshire, St. Bonaventure, and ultimately where I ended up going, University of Dayton, Ohio. I got an ROTC scholarship. And that was the start of my military career, more or less. I went into Dayton kind of with eyes wide open and did everything I could to, excel in ROTC, and ultimately got awarded a flight slot when I graduated from UD and headed down to Fort Rucker in 2005.
At what point did you think to yourself, man, I want to fly helicopters? Did you look at helicopters flying overhead when you were a kid and think, man, I want to be that?
It was never like that. I never, went to air shows and saw helicopters or airplanes and said, I want to be a military pilot. I just like flying. I love traveling. And that was really it. It was plain and simple. It wasn't some, shiny plane in the sky that led me to be a pilot. I just went to ROTC, and then, as it started to come around for job selection time, I said, man, I don't know if I want to be a ground guy. I don't know if I want to get on tanks, but being a helicopter pilot's pretty cool. And I I had watched Black Hawk Down in the theaters when it was released. And at that point, I instantly knew I wanted to go to that unit and be a pilot.
Wow. No, that's pretty cool. So you attended ROTC after September 11th, right?
I started before September 11th. I was a freshman in college, and I was actually at morning PT for ROTC. I just got back from PT, and the towers had started to come down after I got out of the shower. So I remember the day, remember that day just like everyone else does. We had jets that were scrambling from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to go, intercept the plane that ultimately crashed in Pennsylvania. And so that was the start of it. And I knew at that point that that's what I needed to do with my life.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Most of the people I've talked to, I've asked that same question, where were you on 9/11? And it's one of those things our generation, at least, will never, ever forget, much like Pearl Harbor for the greatest generation. And do you remember like the first images you saw of the World Trade Center?
I remember standing in my room in my dorm, looking up at the TV, seeing the towers on fire. And then the only other image, there's two other images I remember. One was looking up and seeing the jets go towards Pennsylvania, two of them. And then the last one was a girl outside of a classroom, just like devastated, bawling her eyes out. Her dad had died when the tower came down. And so I remember kind of those three images, and nothing much really from the rest of the day, but those just always stuck out of my mind.
So at that point, much like most of us who were in the military, I was in the military at the time, it's kind of a realization like, oh, things are going to be different from now on. I think most of us knew. I don't think any of us knew that it was going to be a 20-year thing, but I think most of us knew, oh, I better get ready, better be packing my bags, or at least getting my affairs in order. So, yeah. So you finished ROTC. About what year?
I graduated in 2005.
Okay. 2005, and went down to Fort Rucker, and that's gotta, I myself, I wanted to be a pilot at one point in my career. And, I don't know, I guess you could say I chickened out. I don't know. I just didn't go through with the application process, but it seems like it's got to be like the first time you go skydiving or something, where you're in this aircraft and you have to move your feet, your hands, and all these things together. What was that like the first time you were given controls of your first, what are those training helicopters called down there?
They were TH-67s, Belljet Rangers, but now they're Lakotas, LUH-72s. Okay. Yeah. So what's that like? It was cool. It wasn't all like, here's the aircraft, go do it. I don't remember a lot from flight school, just because it was so fast paced. Wake up at 3 a.m. to get to the flight line by 4:45, and then you don't get home until 6 or 7. You study for 2 hours, you go to bed, repeat. Right. But I do remember, the first time I hovered. I remembered the first time I soloed and flew in the aircraft by myself, which was exhilarating. It was cool to be able to hover. Hovering is like the ultimate hand-eye coordination, mind focus activity that you can do. Mm-hmm. Because if you catch a wind or you lose control of that tail rotor, you can bury that thing in the earth pretty fast.
Yeah. I flew in a simulator once, and I was asked to hover, and I buried it into the earth. So, it's like you make a power change input with the thrust or the collective, and that will change what you have to do with the tail rotor. Mm-hmm. And then if you induce any, pitch up or down, it's just like this whole coordinated like mess of controls that as you get into a more advanced aircraft, it actually hovers for you. Oh. So you don't have to. You don't have to do any of that. I mean, in the G model that I flew it in the unit, you could punch in all of your flight route, everything down to the grid coordinate, and press a button, and it would pick up to a hover, turn, take off, fly the route, and come to a 10-foot hover on the target. Oh man, what fun is that though?
Well, I mean, it's just it's a different type of flying.
Yeah,
because you're doing mission management, you're calculating in fuel and weight burn based off of the winds and the outside air temp, and it's pretty challenging, especially if you're trying to get the maximum number of operators on a target. You don't want to short the ground force commander any muscle on the target, but you also want to get to the target and then let's just call it hover and crash because you misplanned.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like a lot of responsibility, obviously. That's something inherent in flying helicopters or even just being a leader in the military. But all right, so finished flight school, and I assume maybe somebody come up to the class and said, "Hey, who wants to apply for this neat unit that you probably all saw in Black Hawk Down?"
Yeah, I mean, that's typically not how it happens at that level in your flight career. They do recruiting events geared more towards post first assignment officers. So requirements to get into the unit are, I think at the time it was like 7 years of Army flight, Army time in a flight billet, 1,000 hours of MVG time, and at least a deployment with a command. When I got to flight school, the first day I showed up to flight training, I had already found out, got the application, put it on my instructor pilot's desk and had him sign it without ever touching a helicopter and said, "I want to go to this unit." He looked at me and he laughed. He goes, "All right, I'll sign your piece of paper." And I submitted it. And before I finished flight school, I had got an assessment and passed the assessment and had orders up to the best aviation unit in the world. So I was pretty lucky. They take one to two guys a year right out of flight school, and they groom them and train them to be a special operations aviator for longevity within the unit. So typical amount of time a guy stays in the unit is probably 4 years, and he'll go back out, and if he's lucky, he'll get to come back and serve another tour. I was able to do two tours back to back. I could have stayed for probably another tour, which would have been upwards of 15 years in the unit.
Wow.
So I was pretty lucky in that regard. Now, it wasn't without its frustration. I had to learn how to be an officer. So I was stuck in a headquarters company, and I did basic Army stuff, learned how to do inventories, counselings. Yeah. I planned the regiment's formal 1 year. But the great part about it was I got to fly anytime I wanted. The unit had 13 Vietnam era V-tail little birds, and they gave me the set of keys to it and said, "Fly as much as you want." So I was flying 2 and 3 times a week with senior warrant officers, battalion commanders, staff guys, and I would plan the whole flight, go fly wherever I wanted to, and that's how I got the majority of my flight time early on in my career before I eventually, after 2 years, went to fly the 47G, which was our most advanced aircraft at the time.
Yeah, I've flown in those a bit, and they are a lot of fun. Flying over either Afghanistan or Iraq and into just over Fort Campbell in those things, it's always a blast. So you had to plan your unit's formal, which I guess is why you decided to leave the Army.
I mean, at the time it was just an additional duty as a lieutenant, right?
Yeah.
But I was really kind of hungry to go down to the line company, and I don't want to say they didn't have a plan for me, but the squeaky wheel was definitely me trying to get to the unit faster, and so I just had to basically go interview with a Black Hawk company commander, a Little Bird company commander, and a Chinook company commander, and I had just started dating a girl and kind of fell in love and said, "Hey, the best opportunity for me to stay in the Fort Campbell area," she was in the music industry, was to fly Chinooks. We had 2 companies of Chinooks here in the line, and then we had a pretty big Chinook training kind of unit. So that was the best opportunity for me to stay not only at Fort Campbell, but stay in the unit because we had more Chinooks than we did any other platform. So if you're a Little Bird guy, you've got 2 places you can go. And right. Guess what? There's 2 platoon leaders in both of those companies and 1 company commander. So there's there's really no place for you to go if you don't rise to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems being a pilot and being an officer, a commissioned officer, so as opposed to a warrant officer, seems from what I've heard, it's a little bit different, a little bit different of a world, right? So, you have to hit the blocks, and there's certain checks you need to make for career progression, right? And they kind of steer you that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a different animal as a commissioned officer when you are required to have the same proficiency as your warrant officers.
Yeah.
But they are the instructor pilots. They're in charge of progressing you. So, you rub them the wrong way as their raider, then guess who's not getting the flight time or the progression. Yeah. So it's like it's an ultimate balance and managing people and personalities. And, I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to get upgraded to a mid-level kind of flight proficiency, which is fully mission qualified. And that's hard to do as a commission guy because you're trying at the same point, you're trying to do commander and platoon leader stuff.
Yeah.
Inventories, evaluations, mission planning. Flying as a commission guy kind of takes a backseat to some of these other things.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, when I got to the unit, the culture in the Chinook companies was, we'll let you fly as a commission guy, but overseas you sit in the jump seat and all you do is make radio calls and kind of help the flight lead and the pilots, think outside the cockpit. And so my first deployment to Iraq, I sat in the cockpit and never touched the controls. I was in the jump seat the whole time.
Yeah.
So my company commander at the time wanted to kind of change that culture. And so did my battalion commander. And we started putting commission guys up front, and it really helped the unit out. It made better commanders because we knew the mission set better, and it also alleviated deployment strain in our warrant officers. If you're a commission guy and you can fly in the right seat and keep a warrant officer at home or not on the road as much, it made a lot of sense at the time, and still does, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard to lead a unit where you're not proficient, right? Or at least going towards that.
How do you ask your people to do something that you're not willing to do yourself or can't do yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. So eventually you decided to hang it up. You decided it's not going to be a career in the Army. What led you to that decision, and what are some of the steps you took to prepare yourself for that?
I mean, I think again, back to being a commissioned officer, you don't get to be on the line for your entire career. And I was getting to the point halfway through my career where I was lucky enough to get promoted below the zone, which if you're an officer or an NCO or you know someone in the military, like timing is everything for the right progression, right slots, right jobs. And so if I wouldn't have got promoted below the zone, I would have likely been able to stay at Fort Campbell. But the fact that I got promoted a year early meant I had to go to school early, and the only slot available after going to our intermediate level of schooling was in Savannah. And my wife at the time, her music business was just crushing it and didn't want to leave Nashville. And so that was the biggest factor. I tried to do everything I could to stay at Fort Campbell, but the Army has other plans for you, and sometimes you don't get a say in what those plans are. So ultimately made the decision at the time to start looking for other opportunities. I was networking in town and started my MBA about 6 months before I got out of the military. So it just kind of happened really fast. I think, I made the decision October and I was out by February.
Yeah. Did you study and work concurrently in your first job out of the military?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like most of us, right? It would have been such a pleasure to be able to just be a full-time student.
It was interesting. I kind of had another, I guess, serendipitous moment where I fell into my next job, and it was such a cool job. I knew a Navy SEAL buddy, who I'm still pretty close friends with. And he introduced me to the chief of staff of the economic cabinet and Governor Haslam's administration. They were looking for an aerospace expert. And, part of my military story is that I had the opportunity to fly 5 different helicopters. And so I knew every single manufacturer. I knew Airbus, Boeing, and, McDonnell Douglas, you name it. All these different variants that I flew gave me the ability to walk into an air show and go into Textron's booth and say, hey, not only am I a Night Stalker, but I've flown your aircraft before. So they hired the governor's economic cabinet. Commissioner Bill Hagerty, who's now a senator, hired me to be the aerospace expert for the state. And I was tasked with recruiting aviation businesses to the state of Tennessee to build their headquarters and their manufacturing facilities. And so I did that for 3 years. I started that job actually while I was on terminal leave. So I didn't have this transition anxiety like, most other people do when they leave trying to figure out what they want. It wasn't the highest paying job, but it was really cool. I traveled all over the world going to air shows and meeting companies and did some pretty amazing things with some great people in that department.
Yeah, that does seem like a pretty cool job. It seems like at least you're working to bring jobs to the state you live in, which is something I think that is at least commendable. So your first job was with the state of Tennessee. Meanwhile, there's a different story in the background, which is you created a product. You're somewhat of an inventor, right? And you want to talk a little bit about how Haven came about and kind of where that led you to make the decision, which, I don't know if a lot of veterans need to, or have to make this decision or get faced with this decision, but you ended up betting on yourself, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I left, when I left the military, I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I just didn't have the idea fully solidified. And so I was kind of out of the military, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life beyond just working at the state, because that was more of a short-term 2 to 3 year thing for me. And my next door neighbor had a break-in, and it just kind of dawned on me, why do we not have a better locking system to prevent people from getting robbed, getting kind of their homes violated? And it started with a styrofoam prototype, a wood prototype, and meeting up with engineers at all over Tennessee to try to figure out how to make this product. And so what you see in our floor-based product is now a lock that is 10 times stronger than any other lock on the market. It's the thickness of a nickel and can detect a break-in. It's pretty amazing. It works with everything you would expect, Alexa and Google and Google's assistant. And she's talking to me in the corner now. But now we've transformed, our technology, which is really the ultimate goal, into a commercial product to prevent active shooters from getting into classrooms. Saw the shooting up in Michigan recently. Our product would have prevented, some of that, could have potentially prevented some of those deaths up there. But it's pretty interesting to see, kind of from a styrofoam prototype all the way through the difficulty of making a fire rated, commercially approved product. And so that's where we're at now. We've got some pretty awesome partners delivering our technology all over North America now.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Alex is the CEO and founder and inventor of HavenLock, which is a lock that is installed at the base of your home door and has a ramp or wedge. How would you describe it? A wedge that
it's a wedge that pops up.
Yeah, a wedge that when activated, it prevents the door from being opened or kicked open, and it's incredibly clever. It looks great, and it works. So obviously, that path of inventing something, obviously it had to take a ton of resources. Meanwhile, you're doing your MBA, you're working for the state. Eventually you leave the state, right? And you work for a different company for a bit. And then before you decided, all right, this is something I have to pursue full time.
Yeah, I was about 3 years into the state, and we were still going through product development. It was really difficult to make this product. Again, it's the thickness of a nickel, but it has to be 10 times as strong as anything else. So we work with DuPont and 3M engineers, and some great manufacturing companies, and it took us a really long time to get the product figured out. I think we started the business in 2014 and we didn't ship first articles until 2018. And at that point we were still kind of bootstrapping it. We had raised some investor money, and I was still working in corporate America, or transitioned to corporate America with Amazon and then eventually to Assurian. And so I was trying to figure out the right time to jump and to really go out and raise additional investor funds and take it to the next level. And the thing that kind of dawned on me was when Parkland happened. And so we could build our technology into a commercially viable product. And at that point, we didn't have our top of door active shooter defense product, which we call HavenLock, even built or invented. And so I literally walked into the corporate office and quit and said, I've given you a week's notice. And on Monday, I was driving up to Chicago to stand in line at Shark Tank.
Yeah.
So it just kind of happened. It was like this, again, another serendipitous moment where I was called to action to go do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing a little bit of the inside the story, or at least some of the struggles inherent with your company, with just, getting a product that you have to kind of see. It's really hard to kind of explain, right? It's one of those products where like, oh, once you hold it in your hand or once you see a video of it, you're like, oh, now I get it. Right. What was that like trying to sell your vision to investors? Was it challenging for you, or have you always had that in you to be able to walk up to somebody and say, hey, I think you would be a good investor for my product, which is this?
Raising money is difficult no matter what product or service you're trying to raise cash for. I think I've probably pitched 500 investors over the life of the company. And I've got a very large number of investors who have invested in my business. So it's about personal connection. They have to like the mission. They have to obviously see the business case for it to make sense. And so I don't know if I'm good at it, but I certainly have been able to catalyze interest and help us, build and invent these additional products that we have. And now we're working with a company called Johnson Controls, the world's largest security company, to deliver our commercial products. So it's just like the mentality we had in the unit: never quit. My Stalkers don't quit. We don't quit in this business. We've had some really difficult times in the life of our company where we're signed up for a $300,000 contract and had no money in the bank. Personally guaranteeing it. So yeah, for any entrepreneur, it's just the never quit mentality, to always try to figure it out, is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, glad you did. So you mentioned Shark Tank, and you gave Shark Tank probably one of its most highest rated episodes, I think. And I know the product works, and I've seen the demonstrations 100 of times, different videos. And I know that 99.9% of the time that you kick a door that doesn't have a HavenLock, it's going to come down in 3 or 4 kicks. And then, on Shark Tank, something happened where things didn't go as planned, but it made for really great TV. You want to talk a little bit about that situation and about that incident?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, getting on Shark Tank isn't easy. I think they have something like 60,000 companies apply. And I didn't have an inside track to it. I just drove up to Chicago, stood in line for 2 hours with 4,000 people, and got 30 seconds to pitch my product. And they said, if we like your product, you'll hear back from us in 30 days. And they just really liked my story. And they called me back 7 days later, and that started a 4-month journey to get out to Culver City in Los Angeles to stand in front of the Sharks. And it was just a really cool experience. I think you have to understand also, when you go on the show, it's TV, and they are notorious for giving bad deal terms to entrepreneurs. And so you got to go in and understand what you're really trying to get out of the show.
They're called Sharks for a reason.
Yeah. Is it truly an investment? Are you that desperate to need to get on the show to take money, right? And if you're savvy enough to get on the show, you're probably savvy enough to be able to raise investor funds outside of it. And so the inside story is we had already had all of our investor funds raised before we went on the show, and we were doing it for exposure. How do you make your show viral or your episode viral? You have to do a demonstration. You have to be memorable, and you have to have something that gets the sharks to stand up on their feet. And so we had some folks construct a set for us, and we moved the set out to Culver City. It had to be mobile. And, that's not like a regular house, right? We wanted to give the audience the ability to see that, this explosive demonstration. And so if the site is mobile on wheels, guess what happens when you kick it? It moves. Every time I was kicking this thing, it was moving, right? And at the same point, the set designer, when he moved it out, he basically required us to build it on a metal frame. And so houses aren't made of metal frames, right? They're made of wooden frames. And so he secured the door through the metal frame using, 4-inch bolts. It was literally a bank vault I was kicking through. Of course, as a night stalker, we rehearse everything, right? So I kicked through the rig that we had built in Nashville in about 4 kicks, which is typical. And, went over to the Haven and couldn't get through the Haven, obviously, because it's a great product and it works. But, the double drop kick made the company famous. It made obviously me famous for, the optics of it. And, what you saw was the result of 7.5 minutes, pared down from 2 hours of pitching.
Wow.
And 17 different camera angles to give you what you saw. So in reality, it took me maybe 11 kicks to get through the door. But it's TV. So they magicked up the intensity and kind of the drama of the scene. And I think the only thing I do remember from kicking through that door was seeing Mark Cuban, stand up and clap. And so you made Shark Tank history. So I don't know, you tell me, is it worth it to get on the show to give up, your business, or is it a play to get as much exposure as possible? And I think we came out on top with succeeding in that fashion.
For sure. Obviously, you became kind of a household name. Haven got its message out there. And I think people saw it for what it was, right? Something that is viable, something that doesn't tarnish your home in any way, because it kind of it sits there and it's barely noticeable, and it works. And you got some pretty damn good TV out of it and exposure, right? So you mentioned that, there's some folks there who maybe need an investment, need a shark. If you had an opportunity, which shark would you have gone with? If the terms were right.
I think we went on there, trying to work with Mark Cuban. Because I just think he's a pretty gritty entrepreneur. But what surprised me was Damon John. Damon John actually made us an offer, and they didn't televise the offer. It wasn't a great offer. But we had a lot of respect for Damon just because of what he's done and built. And so, I would have, if the terms were right, I would have taken an investment from Damon and went and built the company. The other sharks really wasn't interested in any of them. They're just there kind of for stage play.
Do you get to talk to them afterwards, or is it kind of?
Nope.
No, it's like, go away. They don't want to talk to you. The stars do not want to talk to you.
Yeah. You see them when you walk in the pitch, and then when you leave, that's it.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm glad you went on there and gave us that good TV. So I know you're on a tight schedule here. So I want to pivot back to being a veteran and your story, which is very compelling, obviously, because you went out, did something incredibly difficult in the military by being assessed and selected to fly with the Night Stalkers. Left what could have been a pretty lucrative career, at least in the military, especially being promoted below zone to major like you were, and then taking a chance on yourself, right? Making the decision for personal reasons, obviously, to leave the military. You kind of had a path. You planned it out. Maybe you didn't think of it like a plan, but it seemed like you arrived to where you needed to be based on the steps that you took and when you took them. But what advice would you have to other people who are considering getting out, or even the veterans who are already out and looking to dump that first opportunity that they had?
And I think education is the most important thing you can do, leaving the military. I think the world still believes that soldiers march around on army bases like they do in stripes, march around with a rifle and do drill and ceremony. And, at age 28, I had managed hundreds of people and millions of dollars of equipment. And that didn't really seem to matter to corporate America. What really changed the mindset of people in the business world, where I was actually able to make a truly like a competitive rate salary to what I was making in the military. I think when I was a captain in the military with flight pay and all my other special pays, I was making probably $130 a year. And my first job at the state, I made $85 for 3 years. It was really tough. But when I graduated with my MBA, it was like a change overnight. Got a job with Amazon. I was back up to making, I think that year I made 160 or 170 grand. Mm-hmm. And so if entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but certainly if you want to get out and have a career in the civilian sector, you need to get additional training, whether that is a skill, some type of technical skill, or go and do what you and I did, which is get an MBA. Like that, I learned earth-shattering stuff. Dayton was a really good education, and so this was helping me brush off.
One second. When you said, "Did I learn groundbreaking stuff?" It cut out a little bit. Can you say that again?
Yeah. In the MBA program at UNC, did I learn groundbreaking stuff? I mean, somewhat, but my undergraduate degree at Dayton was in finance. So I learned a ton there, and the MBA helped me dust those skills off, update them. I learned a lot about entrepreneurship. My second year in the program, my mentor, Ted Zoller, who's still at UNC, allowed me to do independent for him for my company. And so my second year at UNC was all focused on Haven, which is awesome. So it allowed me to get the certificate of approval and get my MBA, but also, allowed me to flush out my ideas. So I definitely believe in education for people who are leaving. You gotta have something other than your military service to hang your hat on.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those, it's that extra bit. It's demonstrating to employers or investors even that you're willing to take that extra step, because frankly, you being in charge of 100 people and millions of dollars of equipment, they're like, okay. Actually, what I found is people don't actually believe it. They think it's a bit of hyperbole, right? It's like, no way you were in charge of 100 people and $200 million worth of stuff, right? So it looks like resume hyperbole and inflation. And it's hard to really put that into terms that people understand and will compel them to make an offer.
You have your resume, right? And it says you're a company commander with, 35 direct reports, a $5 million budget. And for me at the time, I had 50 helicopters, which is $1 billion of equipment. And you get to your first interview with Amazon and they're like, hey, are you comfortable managing 5 people? Have you ever managed a budget? And it's like, they don't even read the resume.
Right.
It's like, yeah, of course. I've run my own P&L, if that's what you're asking, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One more thing before we go, Alex, and I appreciate your time. I always like to hear, everybody has that like funny story or embarrassing story from the Army, not from like falling down and almost breaking your shoulder on national television, but what's one of those stories that you remember that you can you keep it PG-13 to R?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was a lieutenant. I still get ribbed for this by at the time Colonel Mangum, who is our RCO, and now I think he retired as a 3-star. And every time I see him, he ribs me for this. But as a lieutenant, I was in a headquarters company, which up at Regiment, which if you know anything about military structure, HHC is where most of the leadership, in their battalion or regiment sit. That's actually who they're assigned to. And so, as an XO of a headquarters company, I was in all the emails with all of the senior staff of the regiment, colonels, lieutenant colonels, senior warrant officers. And so at the time, my company commander, who was a captain and I was a lieutenant, said, hey, we really want the senior staff to come out and support, our PT test tomorrow. It'd be good or our PT event. It'd be great for you guys to be in front of the soldiers, and we really like your support. And I emailed back and unknowingly hit reply all and said, no. I'm going to stay in bed tomorrow and not show up for PT. And as soon as I sent that, my company commander was like, "What have you done?" And I started getting phone calls. I tried to rip the cord out of the wall. I called down to the IP section. I was like, how do I get this email out of people's inbox? And so if you know anything about, recalling an email, every time you recall an email, it sends a notice that you're recalling it, which I didn't know. I recalled the email 7 times. And so everyone got 7 to 9 emails from me. And it was just like, I had people calling me like, stop recalling the email. And so as, every time you leave and go on to a new assignment, my plaque said, Second Lieutenant Alex replied to all Bertelli. And so that was kind of my funny PG story. And every time I see General Mangum now, he's like, hey, send any more emails out. And so that was the funniest PG story I had. And God, I look back to it and I was like, God, I was such an idiot.
I should have just owned it.
Yeah. Like,
the next email should have said, yeah, I said it. What?
Yeah. It made me infamous, more or less. And so it was a lesson learned. Like, lieutenants make dumb mistakes, and it kind of humbled me a little bit, at the same time.
Yeah.
It took the edge off. I had an edge. So
yeah, the military isn't as high cut or high and tight and straight walking as people think. People do have a sense of humor, but thanks for that story, man. And thank you for being on the podcast. And for those out there, where can they find the product, and where can they find you?
Yeah, you can go to our website, HavenLock.com. We also sell on Amazon, Lowe's, and Home Depot for our residential customers. And then our commercial product for churches, synagogues, and schools is located on HavenLockdown.com. And we typically will walk a customer through a journey with that product personally with our staff here. So you can reach us or see more about our products on both of those websites.
Awesome, man. Alex, I appreciate you coming on. Have a great day, man.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. Later, buddy.
Later.
All right, folks. So another episode of Return to Base is in the books. That, of course, was Alex Bertelli, a good friend of mine, a former member of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, affectionately known as the Night Stalkers, the CEO of HavenLock, an entrepreneur. His story, I think, is really great for this audience because it shows us that there's more than one route to take as a veteran as you're transitioning. You don't have to go down the corporate route necessarily. You don't have to go into government contracting. You can be an entrepreneur. You can take a gamble on yourself. And Alex did. He took a chance on himself, and through determination and grit was able to build something really great from scratch. Obviously, it was a lot of fun to talk about his viral moment on Shark Tank. Even more fun to talk about how that experience, even though they didn't get a deal, it was a blessing in disguise, really. So Alex proves that, of course, Night Stalkers don't quit. Once again, you can find Haven's home products at HavenLock.com. That's HavenLock.com. And if you have the need for their commercial applications, it's HavenLockdown.com, HavenLockdown.com. I've actually seen these products in action. As I was transitioning from the military, I worked with HavenLock as part of my skill bridge. And I've actually installed them in homes. I've installed them in a school here in Tennessee, actually. And I can tell you they really do work. And it's quite a remarkable feat of engineering when you think about it. Something very simple, but it works. So once again, thanks to Alex for joining us. And if you have not subscribed to Return to Base, please do so. We're available, of course, on just about all of the podcast hosting sites, Spotify, etc. And while you're at it, visit us at VeteranLife.com. That's VeteranLife.com. Until next time, this has been Return to Base.